Are you looking for the best camera for wildlife and nature photography? Then you're absolutely right in this video. Today we will talk about this camera, the Canon EOS R5. I've been using it now since around 2 years and I couldn't be happier. It's just such an amazing camera, especially for the price, and it helped me to realize photos in really difficult lighting and action scenes, and I'm so glad that I decided back then to buy this camera. But before I tell you what I like most about this camera and why you should buy this, I want to show you some facts. The Canon EOS R5 has a 45 megapixel sensor, which makes it possible to have really high dynamic range and also a really detailed photo. You can shoot 20 frames per second in electronic shutter and 12 frames per second in mechanic shutter. It is possible to shoot 8K in 12-bit and 4K with 120 frames per second. It has IBIS, so in-body image stabilization, and one SD card slot and one CF Express card slot. But now let's talk about what the camera makes it so nice. The first reason is simply the price. You can get it if you're lucky for 2,000 euros refurbished. I think new it costs about 3,000, but back then in 2020 it costed more than double of the price. So maybe you think now that 2,000 euros is quite a lot, and that's definitely true. But you have to keep in mind that this is a full professional camera and it's a high-end camera for especially wildlife and action photography. And if you compare it to other cameras like the EOS R1 or the EOS R3 or even the EOS R6, it's really cheap because all of these cameras are costing more than double of the price. And this makes it just an amazing camera, especially for people who maybe don't want to spend 5,000 euros for a camera body. And of course the camera is already 5 years old, but this makes the technique inside not bad. It's still really up to date. It can be compared to newer cameras like the R5 Mark II, and that's just amazing. Another point, and maybe the point that I recognized the most when I switched from my old Canon EOS R, which is filming me right now, to my brand new R5 is the autofocus. Maybe it's not really fair to compare the autofocus from my old EOS R with the EOS R5, but it's just amazing. The R5 has dual pixel autofocus, which makes it possible to have animal and bird eye autofocus, and this is maybe the best feature and the most important feature for me for wildlife photography, because especially in action scenes where maybe a bird is flying over, or I don't know, two foxes are fighting or whatever, it's just so nice to just press a button and the autofocus locks on the eye. And moreover, the autofocus of the R5 is just super fast and super precise. When I'm photographing a bird which flies next to me, then I get maybe out of 10 photos 9 sharp ones. Of course it always depends on the background and so on, but it's just super nice and super important for me to take good action photos, interesting action photos, and the autofocus of the R5 makes it possible to realize these shots. Another reason is the sensor of the R5. It has 45 megapixels, and for me this is perfect. There are cameras out there with 60 megapixels or even more, but this is just too much for me because like the image sizes are getting bigger and bigger, and it's just not fun for me to edit them when it takes like hours of loading photos from my SD card to my computer. And then there are also cameras, a lot of cameras, and also a lot of like professional cameras, for example the R1, the R5, even the R6 and the R6 Mark II, they all have around 24 to 26 megapixels, and that's just not enough for me because I really like to crop. I mostly use my camera for wildlife photography with my 600mm lens, and it's just so nice to have some backup pixels. For example, here this cormorant, and it's so nice to take a photo maybe when the animals are quite far away, and then just having the possibility to crop in is amazing. Because of the full frame sensor, and especially the sensor built in the R5, gives me the opportunity to shoot in difficult low light sceneries. And this is especially important for wildlife photography. A lot of animals are coming out in the evening in the dust when it's getting dark and there's not much light, and then it's normal to have an ISO of maybe 12,000 or higher, and having a camera which can handle this high ISO without much noise, it is just amazing. A lot of times when I photographed the deer, there was almost no light, and I needed to shoot with maybe ISO 25,000 or even higher, and these photos are still usable. Another advantage of a full frame sensor is the high dynamic range. Especially for landscape photography, this is really necessary and nice to have, but also for wildlife photography when maybe a photo is a bit too dark and you have to brighten up the dark areas in your photo, then you just have the backups and the reserves in these darker areas. Another point what I like about the sensor is the IBIS, so the in-body image stabilization. And this is super nice because honestly I don't really like a tripod. It's just not really flexible. You need to set it up, and if suddenly something's happening behind you, then you have to put the tripod behind you, and I just try to avoid using the tripod as much as possible. And for these reasons, an IBIS is really necessary because it makes it easy to shoot out of your hand, holding a big telelens, and nothing is shaking too much. This is especially helpful in low light conditions when you have to use a lower shutter speed, and if you want to take videos, because nobody wants a really shaky video. And I mean, look at these videos here. I made them all handheld and you don't really see it. Another great thing about the EOS R5 is the shooting speed. It allows me to take 20 frames per second in electronic shutter and 12 frames per second in mechanic shutter. And for me, this is mostly more than enough. It's completely enough for most situations I shooting animals, but even shooting flying birds 20 frames per second is insane. And maybe it's even better to have 20 frames instead of maybe 30 or more, because then your memory card is getting full really quickly. Of course, in some situations, for example, when smaller birds are flying around or when some birds are fighting or something, then it's sometimes good to have even more than 20 frames per second, but I would say in 99% of my situations I shoot 20 frames are enough. Back then when I photographed with my EOS R, then I had, I think, 5 frames per second. And when I switched to this camera, I realized how nice it is to have such a high frame rate. Because if you only can shoot 5 frames per second, you just miss so many shots. When there are flying birds around you, then it's hard to get the right position of the wing of the bird when you only have 5 frames per second. So this is something absolutely nice. Furthermore, having the ability to shoot 4K video in 120 frames per second is super nice. I especially just love to shoot in slow motion. It makes just movements of animals look way smoother, way more cinematic. For example, when I photographed and filmed the dipper in an older video, you can watch it later on here, then it's so nice to capture the small movement the dipper makes. You will never see when you're not in slow motion. And these recordings are just amazing, and shooting 4K 120 frames per second gives you just so many opportunities back then when you edit your videos, and it's super nice and something I'll definitely don't miss at the camera. Another reason why you should buy this camera is overall the quality. It's such a nice feeling to keep it in your hand. It makes a really high quality feeling, and it's super fun to photograph. And this is something you should definitely not underestimate, because it's a whole other thing if you like to hold your camera in your hand and go out, and it makes no sense to have a camera you don't like. And with all the features that brings the R5 with it, it's just a super nice all-rounder for nearly every type of photography. And I love it every time I take this camera in my hand, go out and just shoot, and it's just working. And this is something I can definitely recommend to you, to invest in a nice camera so it makes fun to photograph with it and you're not annoyed because your camera didn't got the autofocus of the flying bird again. My last reason why this camera is amazing is maybe not important for everybody, and honestly most of the Canon cameras have this feature, but I'll tell you in any case, and it's the tiltable display. So you can flip this display just out and you can tilt it in almost every direction, and this is super nice. Of course, for me, I'm filming myself a lot, and especially then it's really nice that I can see myself, like if I flip it like this. But also when you photograph something on the ground, maybe insects, maybe mushrooms, maybe even a hair or something, and your camera is lying down, and then having the opportunity to flip out your display, tilt it up, and looking from it above, it's just amazing, and it makes it possible to shoot angles, really difficult angles where you maybe cannot lie down, or maybe it's wet and you just don't want to lie down to the ground, and then this is super nice to have. I think I could continue telling you why this is the best camera and why you should buy it, but I think now I told you the most important reasons, and I hope I was able to convince you to buy this camera. By the way, I don't get money for anything, it's just my own opinion, and I'm just so happy, and I can only recommend this camera. And especially when I keep in mind that this is a professional camera. Back then, maybe 4 years ago, this was the best camera Canon offered, and all of the wildlife photographers photographed with this camera. Of course, nowadays we have the R5 Mark II, and maybe there are some slightly better options also in the R6 Mark II. They have pre-burst and all that little stuff, but honestly these are no reasons for me for a price gap between the R5 and the R5 Mark II of, I don't know, 2,000 euros. And because of this, like if you keep in mind that this is a professional camera, back then they paid 4,000 euros for it, and it's only slightly worse than the newer cameras, which costs more than double of the price of the R5. And I think keeping all these points in mind makes the R5 an unbeatable camera, especially for wildlife and nature photography. If you're now interested and want to see how I photograph with this video and maybe make your own opinion about it, then just watch this video here. I photographed some deer there with the R5, and I think the recordings are just amazing. So I would be happy if you give this video a thumb up, leave a subscription, and we hopefully see us in this video or one of my next videos. I hope you're having a great week. See you out there, guys. Bye.